Here we have the 970 G1 Gaming from Gigabyte in our good place to start computer. This is a really great setup. What we have here first is the user bench results that classifies it as a gaming battleship and a desktop battle cruiser. Which, specifically the gaming is the area which we are interested in, where it actually with the 970 scored a 85%. Basically, for most of our builds, we normally see this. We see that on average, we get higher than the 50th percentile, meaning the match of components we have in our systems tend to perform very well. The specific case we can see here with our good place to start thing, it's in the 79th percentile, with our CPU performing in the 85th percentile. Our 970 here, which the G1 Gaming is performing in the 85th. If you overclock it, you can of course get it higher. Same thing for the hard drives. The hard drives performing really well. The memory is performing really well. But the main important bit here is specifically the graphics card here, which says it is actually doing excellent, and now let's have a look at what the actual performance are when you look at games. Strike score. This is basically 3D Mark's P2160 test. As you can see, the graphics score is quite good. We've received a 9600 for here. The physics score is actually also quite good with this 65 watt 6600 processor. If you would want to get your physics score up, which helps for some of the newer titles, you can look at rather going for something like a 6700K or the 140 watt processors. But overall, this is a very good fire strike score. If we compare it to the online platform, basically what they're saying is a computer like this would be fine for VR. This is relative. It is the minimum spec for VR, a 970. Because of the match of components, we actually get a little bit above what you'd normally expect with this, but that is what we always aim for. So the 970, it's coming down in price. It's a good option. It still runs, if you're running a P2160, you can still set everything absolutely max. And if you have a look at the other video, you'll see what it does at higher resolutions as well. But yes, now let's go on and have a look what it actually looks like in gaming at P2160. Here we have Dota running at 4K. Now we finally got the 970 to a point where it can't keep at the game's limit of 120 frames per second, but we're still seeing mid 90 frames per second, so really there it drops down to 79 with 4 euros on the screen. But basically it seems to be more than capable of running Dota very comfortably at 4K. Here we have CSGO running at 4K, getting nice smooth frame rates. 970 still seems to be up to older game like this at 4K. We're looking at so far between 90 and 100 frame rate. There we dropped down only about to 86, so that's good. I think the lowest we saw there was about 75, so seems to be perfectly comfortable at 4K on CSGO. Here we have Civilizations 5 at 4K. 4K we start to see a bit of a drop in the frame rates. We're now all of a sudden running in the mid to high 60s. So if you do end up getting a very busy battle scene, you actually might drop under the 60 frames per second in Civilizations here. Actually, there we just did. We dropped down to 52. Keep in mind this is with everything set to maximum, so it's not necessarily a fair reflection of of the maximum frame rates you can get, but it is sort of borderline. So Civilizations does actually tax the 970 if you're running it at 4K resolution. Here we have Call of Duty 5 Nazi Zombies running at 4K, and like with 2K we're seeing 91 frames per second, and that's with VSync turned off, so I have a feeling it's just the maximum that the engine here is willing to run. But that is excellent. Not seeing any frame rate drops or anything where there's more visuals, so something like this at 4K of the 970 seems perfectly fine. This is Skyrim running at 4K, and now we're starting to tax this 970 a bit. You can see there's a little bit of screen shadow, not much, it's still playable, but with this scene here we're looking at about 36 frames per second, which is a little bit lower than I would want for a first-person shooter. Keep in mind, this is running at 4K with everything maxed out. With the flames there, we're dropping down to about 34 frames per second, and it seems to be staying around there. If we go to a bit quieter scene, climbs up to about 40 frames per second, but really at 4K you would want to be setting a few of the detail settings a little bit lower with this graphics card. Here's Borderlands the pre-sequel running at 4K. Immediately we can see we're starting to really tax this 970 now. We're sitting at about 45 frames per second, which isn't bad, but it isn't ideal, and if we get ourselves into a bit of trouble here, it seems to actually stay fairly okay there. It drops down a little bit, but not terribly much. Yeah, it seems like it's everything set to maximum at 4K, and it seems like it's happy to stay at around 40 to 45 frames per second, which is playable. It's not perfect, but if you set one or two of the details a little bit lower, you should be able to achieve 60 frames per second. At 4K we see that 970 is starting to struggle a bit again, but it's still staying surprisingly playable. It's basically everything almost set to maximum with Project Cars, and we're running at about 50 frames per second. The lowest I've seen is about 45, which is actually not too bad. Yeah, we're running at 50 frames with a scene like this. So if it gets to a serious battle in the race, might start dropping below that 45 frames, which starts to become annoying. But for the 970 to actually be giving you playable frames with everything set to maximum at 4K is very, very impressive here. At 4K, the 970, as you would expect from a game like Battlefield, starts to really struggle. We're here at about 38 frames per second. Do feel a bit of the shudder, and here we're dropping down to about 31 frames per second with a lot of vegetation in the scene. So but that being said, this is at ultra. If we set it a little bit lower, you'd still get a very nice experience playing at 4K with the 970. Here we have Fractured Space running at 4K, and now we're starting to let our poor 970 here struggle a bit. Without firing, we're sitting at 25 frames per second. If we start to fire, we drop down to 21 frames per second, and that's just with a single ship and shot. So that 4K and ultra settings is a little bit high for a 970. If we get an explosion there, drop down to about 22 frames per second. Anything under 45 gets a little bit annoying in Fractured Space, so if you're looking to do 4K, I'd rather go for something a bit larger in terms of graphics card, or set some of the details lower.